The silver mine collapsed around Phillip Ashford with a sound like thunder breaking the bones of the earth itself. And through the roar of falling stone and the sudden flood of cold water pouring from a ruptured aquifer above, he saw the other miners abandoning their lanterns and running for the shaft entrance while he lay pinned beneath a support beam that had crushed his leg and trapped him in rising water that tasted of metal and ancient darkness. He tried to shout, but his voice vanished into the chaos, and the pain in his leg was a white fire that threatened to pull him under into unconsciousness, even as the icy water climbed past his waist. The survey maps he had been sketching floated away from his nerveless fingers. Phillip had come to the frontier mines 3 years ago with a head for geology and a knack for finding silver veins where others saw only worthless rock. And the mining company paid him well to map the tunnels and mark the richest deposits. But no amount of silver was worth dying alone in the dark with water filling his lungs. Through the dim glow of a single abandoned lantern that swung on its hook and cast wild shadows across the collapsing tunnel, Phillip saw someone moving against the tide of fleeing workers. Not someone, he realized as his vision sharpened with the desperate clarity that comes when death walks close. An orc woman, shorter than the human miners but powerfully built in the way of someone who has spent years swinging a pickaxe and hauling ore. Her skin was the deep green of forest moss, and her dark hair was braided back from a face marked by small tusks that curved up from her lower jaw. She wore the same rough canvas work clothes as the rest of the crew, mud splattered and torn, and she was running toward him instead of away. "The ceiling," Phillip managed to gasp, pointing upward where cracks spider webbed through the stone and water poured in silver sheets. "Get out." She ignored him entirely. Instead, she braced herself beneath a sagging timber that looked ready to give way at any moment, setting her shoulders under the wood and pushing upward with her legs to take the weight. Her muscles stood out in sharp relief along her arms, and the cords of her neck went taut, and Phillip heard a sound escape her throat that was half grunt and half growl of pure effort. The timber lifted perhaps an inch, perhaps 2, but it was enough to stop the immediate collapse. The groan of stressed wood-changed pitch became something that might hold for minutes instead of seconds. "Pull yourself free," she said through gritted teeth, her voice strained but steady. "I cannot hold this long." Phillip tried to move, but his leg was still pinned beneath the fallen beam, and when he put his hands down to push himself backward, his palms slipped on the wet stone, and he cried out as fresh pain lanced through him. The water was up to his chest now, cold enough to make his whole body shake, and he could see her legs beginning to tremble with the strain of holding the ceiling from caving in entirely. "My leg is caught," he said, hating the weakness in his voice. She did not waste breath on cursing or questions. Instead, she shifted her stance carefully, redistributing the weight she carried, and then reached down with one hand while keeping the other pressed against the timber above her. Her fingers found the beam that trapped him, and she tested it, feeling for leverage, and then she simply heaved it upward with a strength that seemed impossible for someone her size. The beam shifted 6 inches, and Phillip dragged himself backward through the water, ignoring the screaming agony in his leg and focusing only on getting clear. The moment he was free, she let the beam drop and grabbed him under the arms, hauling him upright and slinging his arm across her shoulders. She was perhaps 5.5 feet tall, nearly a head shorter than Phillip, but she carried his weight without hesitation and began moving toward the tunnel entrance with quick, sure steps, even as the roof behind them finally gave way entirely and collapsed into the space where he had been lying. They made it perhaps 20 feet before another section of ceiling cracked and showered them with loose rock. She turned her body to shield him, taking the impact on her back and shoulders, and then kept moving. The water was flowing past them now in a strong current that tried to knock them from their feet, and Philip could barely see through the dust and spray, but she seemed to know the way by instinct or memory. When a timber snapped and swung down like a club, she ducked beneath it and kept her grip on him, never slowing. And when the lantern light faded to nothing, she simply kept walking through the absolute darkness with Philip stumbling along beside her. Time became meaningless. Philip focused on breathing and staying conscious and putting one foot in front of the other, trusting this stranger to guide him through a mind that was tearing itself apart around them. His injured leg dragged uselessly and left a trail of blood in the water, and he could feel himself getting weaker with each step. But her arm around his waist was like iron, and she held him up when he would have fallen. Then there was fresh air on his face and gray daylight that seemed bright as noon after the darkness of the mine, and they were stumbling out of the entrance shaft into a crowd of miners who shouted and pointed. Someone tried to take him from her, but she shook her head and carried him all the way to the medical tent, before finally lowering him onto a cot with surprising gentleness. Her face was covered in rock dust, and there was blood on her temple from a cut he had not seen her receive, but her dark eyes were calm and focused as she looked down at him. "You will live," she said, and there was satisfaction in her voice. "Thank you," Philip said, reaching for her hand. "Please, your name. I need to know your name." But the tent flap opened and the mine foreman pushed inside with the company doctor, and when Philip looked again, the orc woman was gone. He tried to sit up, tried to call after her, but the doctor was already cutting away his trouser leg to examine the damage, and someone else was pressing a cup of something bitter to his lips. The world tilted and spun, and Philip fell into darkness that was softer and warmer than the mine had been, but no less complete. When he woke, it was night, and his leg was splinted and bandaged and throbbing with a deep, awful ache that made his teeth clench. A single candle burned beside his cot, and the tent was quiet except for the snoring of another injured miner across the way. Philip lay still and stared at the canvas ceiling and thought about dark eyes in a dust-covered face, about impossible strength and a calm voice telling him to pull himself free, about the way she had turned her body to shield him from falling rock. He had not even thanked her properly, had not learned her name or where she came from or why she alone had run back into the collapse when everyone else fled. The debt sat heavy in his chest, heavier than the pain in his leg, and Philip knew with perfect certainty that he would not rest until he found her again. 3 days passed before he could stand, and a week before he could walk with crutches. The mine company doctor, a thin man named Harris who smelled of whiskey and carbolic soap, told him the leg would heal, but he would need to stay off it for at least a month. The mining company paid him for the work he had completed, and added a small bonus for hazard pay, and the foreman came by to shake his hand and express relief that their surveyor had survived. Philip asked about the orc woman who had saved him, and the foreman's expression went carefully blank. "Do not recall any orc woman," the man said. "You were pulled out by the crew, brave men all of them." It was a lie so transparent that Philip almost laughed, except there was nothing funny about it. He pressed for details, and the foreman became uncomfortable, shifting his weight and looking toward the tent entrance as if planning an escape. Finally, the man admitted that yes, there had been an orc on one of the dig crews, a woman hired on temporarily when they were short-handed, but she had left immediately after the collapse and he did not know where she had gone. "What was her name?" Philip asked. "Did not catch it," the foreman said, which was another lie. "Look, Ashford, you take care of that leg and do not worry about the details. Company is grateful for your service and looks forward to your return once you are healed." Philip wanted to grab the man by his collar and shake the truth out of him, but his leg throbbed and his hands trembled with weakness, and he knew he would only embarrass himself. So he nodded and let the foreman leave, and then he began asking other miners who came through the medical tent. Most of them claimed not to remember any orc woman. A few admitted they had seen her but did not know her name. One older man, a driller with scars on his hands from years of working with dynamite, finally told him the truth in a low voice. Her name was Orla, the man said, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. Worked on the eastern dig for about 6 months. Good worker, strong as 2 men and twice as reliable. But the foreman did not like having an orc around, said it made the company look bad, like they could not find enough human labor. After the collapse, after she pulled you out, they told her services were no longer needed and sent her on her way without even the week's pay she was owed. Why? Philip demanded, his voice rising. She saved my life. She saved the company's surveyor. They should have given her a medal, not fired her. The driller shrugged, his expression resigned. Because if word got out that an orc woman was the one who ran back into that mine while all the human workers fled, it would make us look like cowards. Bad for morale, the foreman said. Bad for the company's reputation. So they rewrote the story, gave the credit to the crew foreman who was actually halfway to the next valley when the collapse happened, and pretended Orla was never there at all. The injustice of it burned in Philip's chest like swallowed acid. He lay awake that night staring at the tent ceiling and thinking about a woman who had risked her life for a stranger and been repaid with dismissal and lies. When morning came, he made up his mind. The moment he could travel, he would find Orla, and he would thank her properly, and he would do whatever he could to make things right. It took another week before the doctor grudgingly agreed that Philip could leave, though he warned him against any strenuous activity and prescribed rest and elevation for the leg. Philip packed his few belongings, collected his pay from the company office, and set out to find the woman who had saved him. He started in the mining camp itself, asking at the workers' bunkhouses and the supply store and the rough tavern where off-duty miners drank away their earnings. No one had seen Orla since the day of the collapse. No one knew where she had gone. The frontier was a vast place, a sprawling patchwork of mining claims and timber camps and small farms carved out of the wilderness, connected by rough roads that turned to mud in spring and froze solid in winter. Philip traveled from camp to camp with his legs still splinted, riding in the back of wagons when he could find drivers willing to take him and walking with his crutches when he could not. He asked about an orc woman, green-skinned and strong, who might be looking for work in the mines. Most people shook their heads. Some looked at him like he was mad for caring. A few spat in the dirt and told him to stop wasting their time with questions about orcs. In a timber camp 2 days west of the silver mine, a cook told him she had seen an orc woman pass through about a week earlier, heading south toward the coal country. In a small farming village at the edge of the mining frontier, a blacksmith said an orc had tried to hire on as a hauler, but he had turned her away because his customers would not like it. Each scrap of information was like a piece of a map, and Philip followed the trail with the same careful attention he gave to surveying mineral deposits, marking the sightings and trying to guess where she might have gone next. Autumn was turning the trees gold and red when he finally caught up with her in a coal town called Bitterton, a grim place of black dust and gray buildings where the workers coughed up darkness and died young. Philip found her standing outside the office of a mine superintendent, her shoulders set in a rigid line as the man inside told her through the open window that they had no positions available and would not have any positions available in the future. and she should try her luck elsewhere. She looked thinner than Philip remembered, and there was a weariness to her that had not been there in the mine. Her work clothes were worn and patched, and she carried a canvas pack that looked half empty. When the superintendent closed the window with a decisive snap, she stood there for a long moment staring at the building, and then she turned and saw Philip watching her from across the street. Recognition flashed across her face, followed immediately by wariness. She glanced around as if checking for an ambush, and then she walked toward him with measured steps, her hand resting on the hilt of a work knife at her belt. Up close, he could see the changes the past weeks had written on her. New scars, new shadows under her eyes, a tightness around her mouth that spoke of hunger and worry. "You are the surveyor from the silver mine," she said. It was not a question. "Phillip Ashford," he said, extending his hand. "And you are Orla Crane. I have been looking for you." She did not take his hand. Instead, she looked at him with an expression he could not quite read, something between suspicion and resignation. "Looking for me? Why?" "Because I never got to thank you properly," Philip said. "Because you saved my life and then disappeared before I could even learn your name. Because the company lied about what you did and fired you instead of rewarding you, and that is not right." "The world is not right," Orla said flatly. "You have traveled all this way to tell me things I already know." Her bluntness caught him off guard, but Philip found himself smiling despite everything. There was something refreshing about her directness after weeks of dealing with foremen and mine officials who spoke in circles and half-truths. "No," he said. "I came to offer you something better than thanks, but first, have you eaten today?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation he saw the answer. Philip shifted his weight on his crutches and gestured toward a rough eatery down the street that advertised hot meals for miners coming off shift. "Please," he said, "let me buy you dinner, then we can talk." For a moment he thought she would refuse. Then her stomach growled audibly and she grimaced, and some of the wariness left her face. "I can pay for my own meal," she said, but her tone was less sharp. "I know you can," Philip said. "But I am asking you to let me pay, because I owe you a debt I can never fully repay, and buying you a meal is a poor start, but it is a start nonetheless." She studied him for a long moment with those dark eyes that seemed to see through pretense and straight to the truth beneath. Then she nodded once, a quick decisive motion, and walked beside him toward the eatery. Philip noticed the way people stared as they passed, the way conversation stopped and miners frowned and one woman pulled her child close as if Orla might be dangerous. Orla herself seemed not to notice or not to care, walking with her head up and her gaze forward, and Philip felt a surge of admiration for her composure. The eatery owner looked less than pleased when they entered, but Philip was human and paying, and the man could not refuse service without cause. So he showed them to a table in the back corner and took their order with poor grace. Orla requested the stew and bread, and Philip ordered the same along with 2 mugs of ale. And when the food came she ate with the focused intensity of someone who had gone too long between meals. Philip waited until she had taken the edge off her hunger before he spoke. "The driller at the silver mine told me what happened after the collapse, how the foremen dismissed you and rewrote the story to make themselves look better." Orla shrugged, sopping up gravy with a piece of bread. They needed someone to blame for the collapse or someone to erase from the story. "I was the easiest to erase." "It was not right," Philip said again. "Many things are not right," Orla said. "Mines collapse, people die, orcs are not trusted and not wanted. These are facts like stone and water. Getting angry about them changes nothing." "Maybe not," Philip said. "But I spent the last month and a half searching for you, because I cannot accept that you save someone's life and get nothing but lies and dismissal in return." That is not a fact I am willing to accept." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something shift behind her eyes. "You are a strange one, Phillip Ashford. Most humans would take their survival as a gift and not question where it came from." "I question everything," Phillip said with a slight smile. "It is part of why I am good at surveying. I look at what is beneath the surface." "And what do you see when you look beneath my surface?" The question was challenging but not hostile, and there was a hint of curiosity in her voice. "I see someone who ran into a collapsing mine when everyone else ran out," Phillip said. "Someone strong enough to hold up a ceiling and kind enough to shield a stranger from falling rock. Someone who has been treated unfairly and is still standing, still looking for work, still fighting." Orla was quiet for a moment, turning her mug between her hands. "I am not a fighter," she said finally. "I am a worker. I dig ore and haul loads and shore up timbers. It is what I know how to do, but every mine I go to they turn me away. Too dangerous to have an orc, they say. Bad for morale. Customers would not like it. So I keep moving and keep trying and keep getting turned away, and my coin runs out a little more each time." The bitterness in her voice was understated but deep, and Phillip felt the unfairness of it like a physical weight. This woman had saved his life at risk to her own, and the world was repaying her with closed doors and empty pockets. It was wrong on a fundamental level, and Phillip had never been good at accepting wrongs without trying to fix them. "What if you did not have to keep asking for work at someone else's mine?" he said slowly, the idea crystallizing even as he spoke it. "What if you had your own claim?" Orla looked at him sharply. "Claims cost money. Good claims cost more money than I will see in 5 years of hauling ore, assuming anyone would hire me for 5 years. "I have money," Phillip said. "Hazard pay from the silver mine, plus savings from 3 years of survey work, and I have something more valuable than money. I have knowledge. I know where the silver is and where it is not. I know which claims have been worked out and abandoned even though they might still have value if someone knew where to look." "What are you saying?" Orla asked, and her voice was very carefully neutral. "I am saying that I have been thinking about this for weeks, ever since I started looking for you. I am saying that I am tired of working for mining companies that lie and cheat and value reputation over truth. I am saying that I want to file my own claim, work my own mine, and I want you to work it with me. Not as a laborer I hire, but as a partner. Equal shares, equal say, equal ownership." The words hung in the air between them, and Phillip could see Orla processing them, turning them over in her mind to look for the trick or the trap. "Why would you do this?" she asked finally. "You do not know me. You do not owe me this much." "I owe you my life," Phillip said simply. "And beyond that, it makes good sense. You are the strongest and most capable miner I have ever seen, and I am a surveyor who can find silver where others see only empty rock. Together, we could make a real go of it. Apart, you will keep getting turned away from jobs you deserve, and I will keep making money for companies that do not value the people who risk their lives in the dark." "You make it sound simple," Orla said, but there was a crack in her armor now, a hint of hope breaking through the resignation. "It would not be simple. People do not like orcs. They especially do not like orcs who own things, who have claims and rights. We would face trouble." "Probably," Phillip agreed. "But I am good at dealing with trouble, and you are good at holding up ceilings that are trying to collapse. Between the two of us, I think we can manage." She was quiet for a long time, staring down at her empty bowl, and Phillip let the silence stretch. This was not a decision to be rushed. This was a choice that would shape both their lives, and she deserved time to think it through. Outside the window, coal miners trudged past on their way to the evening shift, their faces already black with dust, and somewhere in the distance a steam whistle blew. "Where would this claim be?" Orla asked at last. "There is a place about a day's ride east of the silver mine where I worked," Phillip said, leaning forward. "An old independent miner worked it for years, then died last winter. His widow wants to sell. The mine itself is in decent shape, not a big operation but solid. There is a cottage on the property and a functioning shaft with most of the equipment still in place. The miner was looking in the wrong places, working a vein that was mostly played out, but I surveyed that area 2 years ago, and I know there is a richer deposit about 50 feet deeper. The widow is asking a fair price because she wants it sold quickly so she can move to the city where her daughter lives." "How much?" Orla asked. Phillip named a figure. It was most of his savings, but not quite all. Orla's eyes widened slightly. "That is a considerable amount of money." "It is a considerable opportunity," Phillip countered. "The mineral rights alone are worth twice that if the deposit is as rich as I think it is. But the widow does not know that, and I am not going to cheat her. I will pay her asking price, and if we strike silver as good as I believe we will both come out well ahead." "And you would put my name on the claim alongside yours," Orla said slowly. "Equal ownership." "Equal ownership," Phillip confirmed. "I will handle the surveying and the business side, dealing with ore buyers and suppliers. You handle the digging and the engineering, the practical work of getting the silver out of the ground. We split the proceeds 50-50 after expenses." "I have no money to invest," Orla said. "You would be putting up all the capital. You will be putting up all the muscle and most of the mining expertise," Phillip said. "That is worth as much as money. More, actually, because I could not work a mine on my own even if I wanted to. My leg is still not fully healed, and I was never much of a digger, even before the collapse. I need you as much as you need this opportunity." It was the truth, but it was also strategy. Phillip had learned over the years that people accepted help more easily when they felt they were giving something in return, and Orla Crane struck him as someone who would rather starve than accept charity. So he framed it as a partnership of equals, because that was how he genuinely saw it, and because he suspected that was the only way she would agree. She looked at him for a long moment, and Phillip had the sense of being weighed and measured with the same care he might give to evaluating a mineral sample. Then, slowly, she extended her hand across the table. Her palm was calloused from hard work, her grip strong and sure. "You are either the most generous fool I have ever met or the cleverest man in the territory," Orla said. "Either way, I accept your offer. Partners." "Partners," Phillip agreed, shaking her hand, and the relief that flooded through him was so intense he almost laughed. He had found her. He had made his offer. She had accepted. Now came the real work. But for the first time since the mine collapse, he felt like the world had righted itself into something that made sense. They left Bitterton the next morning, riding in a wagon Phillip rented with the last of his spare coin. The trip east took 3 days, following rough roads through autumn forests that blazed with color, and Phillip used the time to tell Orla everything he knew about mining operations and ore markets, and the best merchants for buying equipment. She listened carefully, asking sharp questions that showed she understood the business side better than she had let on, and she in turn told him about her years working in mines across the frontier, about the different techniques for following a vein, and the signs that warned of unstable ground. "How did you know the ceiling was going to hold long enough for me to get free?" Phillip asked on the second day, genuinely curious. Orla smiled slightly, a rare expression that softened her features. "I did not know, I guessed. Sometimes you survive by running, sometimes by staying and bracing what wants to fall. I read the timbers and the rock and made my choice. You could have died. So could you, certainly. So could everyone in that mine. But you were the only one who was trapped, and I was the only one who went back, so the math was simple." "Simple," Phillip repeated, shaking his head. "You have an interesting definition of simple." "The world is simpler than people make it," Orla said. "Someone needs help. You help them if you can. Someone offers you a fair deal, you take it or you do not. People complicate things with fear and pride and old hatreds, but underneath all that, the choices are usually clear." Phillip thought about that as they traveled, thought about the clarity of her worldview and the way she cut through complication to get to the heart of things. It was not naivety, he decided. It was something closer to wisdom, the kind that came from seeing the worst the world had to offer and choosing to act with decency anyway. The more time he spent with Orla Crane, the more he found himself liking her, and not just because she had saved his life. She was smart and strong and honest in a way that was increasingly rare, and he thought they might actually make a good team beyond the practical benefits of pooling resources. They reached the property on the afternoon of the third day. It sat in a small valley where a stream ran clear over rocky beds, surrounded by pine forest that climbed the slopes on every side. The cottage was small but well built, stone and timber with a good roof and real glass in the windows. Behind it stood the entrance to the mine shaft, properly timbered and gated, and nearby was a sturdy shed that held equipment and tools. A small garden plot showed signs of recent tending, and someone had built a chicken coop, though the chickens themselves were long gone. "This is it," Phillip said unnecessarily. Orla climbed down from the wagon and walked slowly around the property, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She inspected the mine entrance, checking the timbers for rot and testing the gate. She examined the cottage, peering in through the windows, and walked the perimeter of the cleared land. Phillip stayed by the wagon and let her look, understanding that she needed to see it for herself, to judge whether his vision matched the reality. Finally, she came back to where he stood. "The bones are good," she said. "Whoever built this knew what they were doing. The mine entrance is properly shored, the cottage is solid. If the silver is where you say it is, we could make this work." "The silver is there," Phillip said with confidence. "I staked my reputation on it when I was surveying for the company, and I am staking my money on it now." "Then we should go meet this widow and make the purchase official," Orla said, "before you come to your senses and change your mind." The widow lived in a farmhouse 5 miles down the road. A gray-haired woman named Martha Coulter, who looked tired and relieved in equal measure when Phillip explained why he had come. She invited them in for coffee and showed Phillip the deed and the paperwork, transferring the mineral rights. And she answered all his questions about the water supply and the equipment and the quirks of the property. She was polite to Orla but visibly uncomfortable, her eyes darting away whenever she looked directly at her, and Phillip saw Orla notice and withdraw slightly, making herself smaller and less threatening. It bothered him more than he expected, that instinctive fear, but he kept his focus on the business at hand. He reviewed the paperwork carefully, asked the widow if she had any other offers, and then made his purchase. He counted out the money in silver coins and bills, and Martha Coulter counted it twice to be sure. And then she signed the deed over to Phillip Ashford and handed him the keys to the cottage and the mine gate. "I hope you have better luck with it than my husband did," she said as they prepared to leave. "He always said there was more silver in those hills, but he never could find it." "I think our luck will be better," Phillip said, and he meant it. They rode back to the property in silence, and Phillip was acutely aware of the keys in his pocket and the deed folded in his coat. He owned land now, owned a mine and a home, and he had a partner to share it with. It felt momentous and terrifying and absolutely right, all at the same time. When they reached the cottage, he climbed down from the wagon and pulled out the keys, and then he stood there looking at them and thinking about what they represented. "What is wrong?" Orla asked, coming to stand beside him. "Nothing is wrong," Phillip said slowly. "I am just thinking about how to do this properly." He separated the cottage key from the mine gate key, and then he turned to Orla and held out the cottage key to her. Not offering it for her to use, but giving it to her to keep, pressing the worn metal into her palm and closing her fingers around it. "This is yours," he said. "Not as a place where you work or a place where you are allowed to stay. As your home, your property. When we file the paperwork to add you as co-owner, your name will be on the deed alongside mine. But even before that happens, I want you to know that this place is as much yours as it is mine." Orla stared down at the key in her hand, and something complicated passed across her face, too quick for Phillip to fully decipher. "You are giving me a house key," she said, and her voice was strange, tight with emotion she was trying to control. "I am giving you a home," Phillip corrected gently. "And a partnership and a future. Everything I promised." For a moment he thought she might cry, but she did not. Instead, she closed her hand tightly around the key and looked up at him with an expression of such raw gratitude and determination that it hit him like a physical force. "I will not let you down," she said fiercely. "I will work harder than anyone you could have hired. I will find the silver and pull it from the ground and make this mine more profitable than any operation in the territory. You will not regret this." "I know," Phillip said simply, and he did know. Whatever else happened, whatever challenges they faced, he was absolutely certain that Orla Crane would give everything she had to making their partnership succeed. They moved into the cottage that evening, dividing the space amicably. The cottage had 2 rooms, a main living area with a fireplace and a kitchen space, and a smaller bedroom. Phillip insisted Orla take the bedroom, and he would sleep in the main room until they could build an addition. She argued, but he pointed out that he was still recovering from his injury, and needed to sleep near the fire where it was warmest, which was at least partly true, and eventually she accepted. The previous owner had left furniture and basic supplies, and Martha Coulter had thrown in the cookware and linens as part of the sale, so they had enough to get started. They spent the next several days settling in and taking stock of their resources. Orla inventoried the mining equipment while Phillip went over the old owner's maps and compared them to his own survey notes. As he had suspected, the previous miner had been following a vein that was mostly silver poor quartz, missing a richer deposit that ran at an angle deeper in the rock. "If we shore up the main shaft and extend it another 60 feet down, then dig a lateral tunnel heading northeast, we should hit the good vein within a few weeks," Phillip explained, marking the route on a fresh map. "It will be hard work and we will need to move a lot of rock, but the payoff should be worth it." "How sure are you?" Orla asked, studying the map. 80% sure," Phillip said honestly. "Geology is not an exact science. But I have been doing this for years, and I am good at reading the signs. The mineralization patterns in the upper levels all point to a concentration in this area." 80% is good enough for me," Orla said. "When do we start?" They started the next morning. Phillip's leg was still weak, but healing well enough that he could manage light work. So he handled the surveying, and the mapping and the sorting of ore while Orla did the heavy digging and hauling. She was even stronger than he had realized, able to swing a pickaxe for hours without tiring, and to haul loaded ore carts that would have broken most men. But she was also smart about it, working efficiently rather than frantically, taking breaks when needed, and always checking the stability of the rock before she dug. They fell into a rhythm quickly. Orla worked in the mine during the cooler morning hours, and Phillip joined her to survey the progress, and mark the next sections to be excavated. In the afternoons, they processed ore and maintained equipment and worked on improving the property. Evenings were for cooking and planning and, increasingly, for talking. Phillip had always been good with people, able to charm and joke and put others at ease, but he found he did not need to perform with Orla. She appreciated directness and had little patience for flattery or games, so he simply talked to her like a person, and she talked back, and slowly they built a friendship alongside their professional partnership. She told him about growing up in a small orc community in the northern mountains, about learning to mine from her father who had worked the copper claims until a cave-in killed him, about the years of wandering and looking for work in a world that mostly did not want her kind. "I used to be angry," she said one evening as they sat by the fire after a long day's work. "Angry at the unfairness, at the way humans looked at me like I was something dangerous or lesser. But anger is exhausting and it changes nothing, so I let it go. I focus on the work and on surviving, and I do not waste energy on hating people who will never see me as equal." "You should not have to accept that," Phillip said quietly. "Should not, perhaps. But I do, because the alternative is to keep beating my head against a stone wall. Better to find a door, even if I have to build it myself." "Maybe this mine is that door," Phillip suggested. "Maybe," Orla agreed, and there was cautious hope in her voice. "If we succeed here, if we make this work, maybe others will see that orcs can own claims and run businesses and be trusted. Or maybe they will just see it as an exception, one strange case that does not change the rules. But either way, it will be ours, and no one can take that from us." Phillip told her about his own past in turn, about growing up the youngest son of a farming family in the eastern provinces, about having a head for numbers and patterns that made him useless at farming but perfect for surveying, about leaving home at 18 with his family's blessing and a small inheritance, and making his way to the frontier where clever men could make fortunes if they were willing to work hard and take risks. "I always thought I would make my fortune, then go back east and buy a big house and live like a gentleman," Phillip said with a self-deprecating smile. "But the longer I stayed out here, the less that life appealed to me. The frontier is honest in a way the cities are not. You survive on your merits, not your family name or your connections. And the land itself is beautiful, wild and dangerous and full of possibilities. And now you are stuck out here with an orc for a partner and a mine that may or may not make you rich," Orla said, but there was warmth in her voice. "I would not call it stuck," Phillip said. "I would call it exactly where I am supposed to be." The comment hung in the air between them, and Phillip realized with mild surprise that he meant it completely. Somewhere between searching for Orla and buying this property and working alongside her every day, his entire vision of his future had shifted. He did not want to go back east. He wanted to be here, in this valley with this mine and this partnership. With her. It was a realization that should have been alarming, but instead it felt natural, like recognizing something that had been true for a while and he was only just noticing. He glanced at Orla and found her watching him with an unreadable expression, and he wondered if she was thinking similar thoughts, or if he was projecting his own feelings onto a situation that was, for her, purely practical. He decided not to push it. They had a good thing building here, a solid partnership and a growing friendship, and he would not risk that by making things complicated. There would be time later to figure out what else might be possible between them, if anything. For now, the work was enough. Winter came early to the mountains, bringing snow that piled deep around the cottage and turned the forest into a landscape of white and dark green. Mining became harder as the ground froze and the daylight hours shortened, but they kept at it, extending the main shaft deeper into the rock. Philip's leg healed fully, though it ached in the cold, and he found himself able to do more of the physical work alongside Orla. They celebrated the winter solstice with a good meal and a rare bottle of whiskey that Philip had saved, and they toasted to their partnership, and to the mine, and to surviving their first season. 2 weeks into the new year, Orla's pickaxe broke through into a cavity and exposed a vein of silver ore so rich it glittered even in the dim light of the work lanterns. Philip heard her shout and came running, slipping on the icy path to the mine entrance and nearly falling before he caught himself. He found Orla standing in the new tunnel staring at the exposed rock face with an expression of amazed disbelief. "You were right," she said as he came up beside her. "You were absolutely right. Look at it." Philip looked. The vein was wider than he had dared hope, a band of silver-rich ore running through the quartz at least 8 inches across and stretching as far as their lights could reach. He chipped off a sample and examined it closely, his surveyor's eye estimating the purity, and his heart began to race with excitement. This was not just a decent find. This was a fortune. "We need to be careful how we work this," he said, forcing himself to think practically. "If we extract too quickly or carelessly, we could destabilize the whole area. And we need to keep this quiet until we have enough ore stockpiled to make a good sale. If word gets out too early, we will have claimed jumpers and trouble." "Agreed," Orla said, dragging her gaze away from the silver. "We work it slowly, carefully, and we tell no one until we are ready to go to market." They spent the rest of the winter extracting ore with painstaking care, working shorter hours to avoid exhausting themselves and to minimize the risk of accidents. The vein kept running rich and true, better than Philip's most optimistic projections, and by the time spring thaw arrived, they had a stockpile of high-grade ore that represented more money than either of them had seen in their lives. Philip made the trip to the nearest assay office to have samples tested, and the assayer's eyes went wide when he saw the purity. He offered to buy the ore on the spot, but Philip politely declined and asked instead for a letter of certification that he could take to the larger ore buyers in the regional trading hub, 3 days' ride to the south. The assayer provided the letter and tried again to make an offer, and Philip smiled and thanked him and left before the man could press harder. "We are going to need to transport the ore to market soon," Philip said when he returned to the cottage. "And we are going to need security, because once we make the sale, everyone will know we have a producing claim." "I can handle security," Orla said. "And I know a hauler who owes me a favor from years back, assuming he is still in the territory. He is discreet and honest." They made their preparations carefully. Orla tracked down her hauler, a grizzled old man named Beck, who took one look at Philip and Orla and the crates of ore and quoted a price that was steep but fair. They loaded the wagon at night and left before dawn, with Orla riding in the back of the wagon guarding the cargo and Philip up front with Beck. The journey to the trading hub took 4 days, and they saw no trouble beyond bad roads and worse weather, but Philip could not shake the feeling of being watched. The trading hub was called Silver Peak, a rough town that had grown wealthy on the mining trade. Ore buyers competed for business on every corner, and merchants sold equipment and supplies at prices inflated by the captive market. Philip chose his buyer carefully, a woman named Garrett who had a reputation for fair dealing, and he presented her with the assay certification and a sample of their ore. Garrett examined the sample with a jeweler's loupe and a careful eye, then looked up at Philip with new respect. "This is quality ore," she said. "Very high purity. How much do you have?" "Enough to make it worth your time," Philip said carefully. They negotiated for 2 hours, with Garrett trying to get him to reveal how much more ore they might have, and Philip deflecting politely, while still making it clear that this was not a one-time sale. Finally, they agreed on a price that made Philip's head spin even though he kept his face carefully neutral. Garrett paid in a mix of coin and banknotes, and she offered them a contract for future deliveries at a guaranteed price, which Philip accepted after reading the terms carefully. By the time they left Garrett's office, Philip's coat pockets were heavy with money and his heart was light with success. They had done it. They had found the silver, extracted it safely, and sold it for a fair price. Their mine was not just a hope anymore. It was a real, functioning, profitable operation. "We should celebrate," Philip said as they walked back toward the wagon where Beck was waiting. "We should get this money back to the cottage and locked in the safe," Orla said practically, but she was smiling. "Then we can celebrate." They made the return journey without incident, and once they were safely back at the cottage, they counted the money and divided it according to their partnership agreement. 50-50, as promised, with the operating expenses coming off the top first. Even after setting aside money for supplies and equipment and taxes, they each had more than enough to live comfortably for a year, and they still had ore in the ground. "What will you do with your share?" Philip asked as they sat at the cottage table with their respective piles of money. Orla looked at her share for a long moment, then carefully divided it into 3 parts. "One part goes back into the mine, for improvements and equipment we need. One part I save for emergencies, because mines are dangerous and unpredictable. And one part I spend on making this cottage more comfortable, because if this is truly my home, I want it to feel like a home." "That sounds wise," Philip said. "I was thinking along similar lines, actually. Reinvest, save, and spend the rest on improvements." He paused, then added, "I also want to ride out to the county seat and file the paperwork to add you as co-owner on the deed. We have been operating as partners, but the legal documents should reflect that officially." Something softened in Orla's expression. "You trust me that much?" "I trusted you with my life in that mine," Philip said. "I trust you with everything else too. Besides, it is not just about trust. It is about what is right. You have earned half this claim 10 times over." "Thank you," Orla said quietly, and Philip saw that her eyes were bright with emotion she was too proud to let spill over. "That means more than you know. They spent the spring making improvements." Philip hired a carpenter to build an addition onto the cottage, giving them each a proper bedroom and expanding the living space. Orla bought new mining equipment and reinforced the shaft timbers and built a proper ore processing shed. They planted a large vegetable garden and bought chickens and a milk cow, transforming the property from a rough mining camp into a real homestead. Neighbors began to stop by, drawn by curiosity about the successful independent claim, and while some looked at Orla with suspicion or discomfort, others were cordial and a few were even friendly. One of those friendly neighbors was a farmer named Thomas Wade who owned land in the next valley over. He came by one afternoon with fresh eggs and an offer to trade vegetables for ore samples, and he treated Orla with the same casual respect he showed Philip. It was such a small thing, but it mattered, and Philip saw the way Orla relaxed slightly around Thomas and began to hope that maybe, slowly, things could change. Summer brought more success. The silver vein continued to produce, and they made 2 more sales to Garrett in Silver Peak, each one as profitable as the first. Word spread that the old Coulter claim was back in operation and doing well, and Philip began to receive visits from other miners asking for surveying work. He took on a few consulting jobs, using his expertise to help smaller operations find better veins, and he charged fair prices and built a reputation for honesty and skill. It was during one of those consulting trips that he met Marcus Denton, the foreman who had fired Orla from the silver mine after the collapse. Denton was working for a mid-sized operation that was struggling with depleted veins, and he came to Phillip asking for a survey and advice. Phillip recognized him immediately, though Denton clearly did not remember him, and for a moment Phillip was tempted to refuse the job outright. But he was a professional, and turning down work out of spite would only hurt his growing reputation. So he agreed to do the survey, and he spent 3 days mapping the mine and analyzing the rock, and he wrote up a detailed report with recommendations. When Denton asked how much he owed, Phillip named his standard fee and then said casually, "I am partnered with Orla Crane on an independent claim now. You might remember her from the silver mine collapse." The color drained from Denton's face. "Orla Crane," he repeated slowly. "Yes," Phillip said, keeping his voice pleasant. "She co-owns the old Coulter claim with me. We are doing quite well, actually. Just made our 3rd major sale this summer. It turns out that when you treat a skilled worker fairly, they do excellent work." Denton opened his mouth, closed it again, and finally managed, "I did not realize." "No," Phillip agreed. "Most people do not realize a lot of things until it is too late. But I am sure your operation will do fine if you follow the recommendations in my report. Good luck with your mining." He left Denton standing there looking like he had swallowed something bitter, and Phillip felt a small, petty satisfaction that he was not entirely proud of, but did not regret. When he got back to the cottage and told Orla about the encounter, she laughed, a genuine full-throated laugh that he had never heard from her before. "You shamed him without ever raising your voice," she said, still grinning. "That is better than any revenge I could have imagined." "It was not about revenge," Phillip said, though his own smile gave him away. "It was about making sure he understood that his choices had consequences, and that the woman he dismissed without pay is now more successful than he will ever be." "Still better than revenge," Orla said, and the warmth in her eyes made Phillip's heart do something complicated in his chest. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid, and Phillip found himself very aware of how close they were standing, of the way the afternoon light caught in Orla's dark hair and highlighted the strong lines of her face. She was beautiful, he realized, not in any conventional way but in the way of someone who was utterly genuine, who had faced hardship and survived with grace, who laughed at petty victories and worked until her hands bled and kept every promise she made. He was falling in love with her. Had been falling for months, probably, but was only just admitting it to himself now. The realization should have been frightening, should have made him step back and reconsider, but instead it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Of course he loved her. How could he not? The question was whether she felt anything similar, and whether pursuing those feelings would ruin the partnership they had built. Phillip was good at reading people, but Orla was difficult to read, her emotions guarded by years of learning not to show vulnerability. He could not be sure, and he did not want to risk their friendship and their business on a misread signal. So he stepped back, let the moment pass, and changed the subject to something safer. But he caught Orla watching him later that evening with a thoughtful expression, and he wondered if maybe she was asking herself similar questions. Autumn arrived again, marking a full year since Phillip had bought the claim and brought Orla into partnership. They decided to celebrate the anniversary with a proper dinner, something fancier than their usual simple meals, and Phillip rode into the nearest town to buy good meat and fresh bread and a decent wine. When he returned, he found that Orla had cleaned the cottage thoroughly and set the table with the good dishes they rarely used, and she had changed out of her work clothes into a simple but clean dress that he had only seen her wear once before. "You look nice," Phillip said, and then immediately felt stupid for such an inadequate compliment. "So do you," Orla said, glancing at the clean shirt and vest he had put on. "It is strange seeing you without rock dust." They cooked together, working in the easy synchronization they had developed over months of sharing space, and then they sat down to eat. The meal was good, better than good, and the wine loosened tongues and lowered guards. They talked about the past year, about everything they had accomplished and everything they had survived, and Philip felt a contentment settle over him that was deeper than any he had known before. "I need to tell you something," Orla said as they were finishing the meal, and there was something in her voice that made Philip go still. "I have been thinking about this for a long time, and I do not know if I should say it, but I have never been good at keeping silent about important things." "You can tell me anything," Philip said carefully. "You know that." "I know," Orla said. She took a breath, and when she spoke again her words came out in a rush, as if she needed to say them quickly before she lost her nerve. "That day in the mine when I went back to pull you out, it was not just because it was the right thing to do. I mean, it was the right thing, but there was more to it than that. When I saw you trapped there when I thought you might die, something inside me refused to accept it. I did not know you. I had no reason to care about you specifically more than anyone else. But I did care, immediately and intensely, and I did not understand why." Philip's heart was beating very fast now, but he forced himself to stay quiet and let her finish. "I think," Orla continued, her eyes fixed on the table between them, "that I recognized something in you even then. Some quality or kindness or I do not know what. And when you came looking for me, when you offered me this partnership and this home, I told myself it was just business, just a practical arrangement. But it was never just that, at least not for me. Somewhere along the way I stopped seeing you as just a partner and started seeing you as—" She trailed off, finally looking up to meet his gaze. "As someone I could love, as someone I do love if I am being honest." The words hung in the air between them, brave and vulnerable and terrifying, and Philip felt something unclench in his chest that he had not even realized was tight. He reached across the table and took her hand, lacing their fingers together, and her skin was warm and calloused and perfect. "I love you too," he said simply. "I have for months, but I did not want to risk what we had built by saying so. I thought maybe you only saw me as a business partner, and I did not want to make things uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable," Orla repeated, and then she laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. "You impossible man. You bought me a house. You gave me a key and told me it was my home. You put my name on the deed and treated me as an equal when no one else would. How could I see that as anything less than love?" "I thought I was being fair," Philip said, smiling. "I thought I was just doing what was right." "You were," Orla said, "but love and fairness are not opposites. Sometimes they are the same thing." She stood and came around the table, and Philip rose to meet her, and when they kissed, it was gentle and careful and full of all the things they had been too cautious to say out loud. Her tusks pressed against his lips, a small strangeness that made the moment feel more real rather than less, and when they pulled apart they were both smiling. "So what now?" Philip asked. "Do we tell people? Do we keep it private?" "We tell people if it comes up, and we do not make a fuss about it otherwise," Orla said practically. "We keep working the mine and building our life, and if anyone has a problem with a human and an orc being together, that is their burden to carry, not ours." "That sounds perfect," Philip said, and he meant it. They spent the rest of the evening talking about the future, about the possibility of expanding the mine or buying adjacent claims, about whether they wanted to stay in the valley long term or eventually move to a larger operation, about what a life together might look like beyond work. It was strange and wonderful to speak openly about feelings that had been simmering unacknowledged for months, and Philip felt lighter than he had in years, as if some weight he had been carrying without realizing it had finally been set down. Winter came again, and this time it felt different, cozier, and more intentional. They spent the cold months working the mine during daylight hours and spending the evenings together by the fire, reading or talking or simply existing in comfortable silence. The physical side of their relationship developed slowly, both of them cautious about navigating something that was still new and a little strange. But the emotional intimacy deepened with every passing week. Spring arrived with a bang when 3 men showed up at the property, claiming that the mineral rights to the lower vein were actually owned by a mining company that held adjacent claims. They had papers and a lawyer, and they demanded that Phillip and Orla cease operations immediately and turn over any ore extracted from below a certain depth. Phillip listened to their demands with a growing anger that he kept carefully controlled, and then he asked to see their documentation. The papers were technically legal, but relied on a creative reading of an old property survey that had been superseded by later work. Phillip spent 2 days going through his own files and Martha Coulter's old documents, and he found the counter-evidence he needed. A clear chain of title that proved the mineral rights to the entire depth of the claim belonged to the property owner, which was now jointly Phillip and Orla. He wrote a careful rebuttal and sent it to the company's lawyer, and he also sent a copy to the county clerk to have it entered into the official record. The company backed down after that, but the incident rattled them both. It was a reminder that success attracted predators, and that they needed to be vigilant about protecting what they had built. Phillip hired a lawyer of their own, a sharp woman named Eliza Grant, who specialized in mining law, and she reviewed all their documents and filed the necessary protections to make sure their claim was bulletproof against future challenges. "You are doing well enough now that people are noticing," Grant said when she came to deliver the updated paperwork. "That means you need to be smart about security and documentation, but it also means you have real leverage. If anyone tries to cheat you or push you around, you have the resources to fight back." It was a good reminder, and Phillip took it to heart. They were not struggling independent miners anymore. They were successful business owners, and they needed to act like it. He began keeping meticulous records of every transaction and every ore extraction, and he made sure all their dealings were documented and legal. It was tedious work, but it was necessary, and Orla appreciated the protection it provided even if she had no patience for paperwork herself. That summer they made their best sale yet, a shipment of ore so pure that Garrett in Silver Peak offered them a premium price and a long-term supply contract. With the money from that sale, Phillip was finally able to pay off the last of the debt from buying the property, which meant everything they earned going forward was pure profit. They celebrated by taking a week off from mining and riding into the regional capital, a real city with theaters and restaurants and shops that sold things beyond mining equipment. It was Orla's first time in a city, and Phillip watched her take it all in with wide eyes and careful attention. Some people stared at her, and a few shop owners were unwelcoming, but more people than Phillip expected treated her with casual courtesy or simple indifference. They ate at a nice restaurant where the waiter did not bat an eye at serving an orc woman, and they saw a play that made Orla laugh until tears ran down her face, and they bought supplies and books and small luxuries to bring back to the cottage. On their last night in the city, as they sat in their hotel room looking out over the lights of the streets below, Orla said quietly, "I never thought I would have this. A home, a business, someone who loves me. I spent so many years just surviving, just trying to get through one day to the next, that I forgot to imagine what a good life might look like. And now, Phillip asked. Now I cannot imagine any life but this one, Orla said. She turned to look at him and her dark eyes were serious. You gave me more than a house key, Phillip Ashford. You gave me a future. We gave each other a future, Phillip corrected. I would still be mapping veins for some faceless mining company if you had not saved my life. We built this together. Together, Orla agreed, and she kissed him, and Phillip thought that no amount of silver could be worth more than this moment, this feeling, this partnership that had become something far more precious than either of them had anticipated. They returned to the valley and to their work, falling back into the rhythms of mining and maintenance and the small domestic tasks that made up a shared life. The vein continued to produce, though they were careful not to over-extract, taking only what they needed and leaving enough in the ground to ensure the mine would remain viable for years. They hired occasional help during the busiest times, paying fair wages and treating workers with respect, and word spread that the Ashford Crane claim was a good place to work. It was on a bright autumn morning, nearly 2 years after Phillip had first pressed the house key into Orla's palm, that Marcus Denton showed up at their property again. This time he was not alone. He brought 2 other men, both of them foremen from different mining operations in the region, and they looked uncomfortable and slightly embarrassed as they stood outside the cottage. Phillip came out to meet them with Orla at his side, and he kept his expression neutral even as he recognized the men who had turned Orla away from job after job, who had spread the lies about the silver mine collapse, who had tried to erase her from the story of her own heroism. Mr. Ashford, Miss Crane, Denton said, his voice stiff but civil. We have come to discuss a business matter. What kind of business? Phillip asked. Our operations need high-quality ore for a special order, one of the other foremen said, a man named Paulson who ran a copper mine to the north. We have been having trouble sourcing what we need from our regular suppliers, and we heard that your silver is particularly pure. We would like to negotiate a purchase, if you are selling. Phillip glanced at Orla and saw his own surprise reflected in her face. These men who had treated her so poorly were now coming to them as supplicants, asking to buy their product. There was a certain poetic justice to it that was not lost on either of them. We are selling, Orla said, stepping forward before Phillip could respond. But we choose our buyers carefully. We do business with people who deal honestly and treat their workers fairly. Tell me, Mr. Denton, how do you treat the people who work for you these days? Denton flushed, but met her gaze. Better than I once did, he said quietly. I learned some hard lessons about the cost of prejudice and the value of skilled workers regardless of their race. It is not an excuse for my past actions, but I am trying to do better. It was not quite an apology, but it was closer than Phillip had expected, and he saw Orla weighing it carefully. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, We will sell you ore at our standard rate, same as we charge everyone else. No premium, no discount. You pay fair and you get fair product, but I want something else in addition to payment. What is that? Paulson asked warily. I want you to go back to your operations and hire fairly, Orla said. When an orc applies for work, you judge them on their skills and experience, not on what they look like. You pay them the same as you would pay a human for the same work. And if you see another foreman lying about an orc's contributions or firing them to protect someone's pride, you speak up. That is my price. The 3 foremen looked at each other, and Phillip could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. They needed the ore, and what Orla was asking was not unreasonable, but it would require them to go against ingrained prejudice and social pressure, Finally, Denton nodded. "That is fair," he said. "You have my word." "And mine," Paulson added. The third foreman, a younger man Philip did not know, said, "Mine as well. And I will do you one better. I will hire an orc foreman if I can find one qualified. Show the rest of the territory that it can be done." Orla smiled, a fierce and satisfied expression. "Then we have a deal. Come inside, and we will discuss quantities and delivery schedules." They spent the next hour negotiating the details, and by the end of it, they had contracts for 3 significant ore deliveries at prices that would keep them comfortable for the next year, even if they did no other business. When the foreman left, Philip and Orla stood on the porch and watched them ride away, and Philip felt a deep sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with money. "You handled that beautifully," he said. "You could have refused them, could have made them pay for how they treated you, but instead you used the opportunity to make real change." "Revenge is cold comfort," Orla said. "But using our success to help other orcs to push these men to be better, that is warm. That is something that lasts." "You are a better person than I am," Philip said with genuine admiration. "No," Orla disagreed. "I am just a person who has spent enough time being angry. Now I would rather build things than tear them down." That winter they began planning for a future that extended beyond the mine. They talked about eventually buying more land, about starting a proper mining supply business to serve the independent operators in the region, about using their success to fund scholarships for young people, human and orc both, who wanted to learn surveying and geology. They talked about marriage, a conversation that started hesitantly but gained confidence as they realized they both wanted the same things. Philip proposed on a cold December evening as they sat by the fire after a long day's work. He had no ring, just a simple question spoken into the comfortable quiet between them. "Will you marry me?" Orla looked at him with surprise and then with a joy so pure it took his breath away. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course, yes." They married in the spring in a small ceremony at the cottage, with Thomas Wade and his wife as witnesses and Eliza Grant officiating in her capacity as a notary public. Orla wore a dress she had bought in the capital, deep green like her skin but richer, and Philip wore his best suit, and they spoke vows they had written themselves about partnership and trust and building a life together in a world that was not always kind, but was full of possibilities nonetheless. The celebration was simple, a good meal shared with their few close friends and neighbors who had proven themselves to be decent people. And that night Philip and Orla lay in their bed in the cottage they had made a home and talked about what came next. "I want children someday," Orla said quietly. "I was not sure I would ever say that, was not sure I would ever trust the world enough to bring children into it. But with you, in this place we have built, I think I could." "I would like that," Philip said. "Though I know it is complicated, a human and an orc. I do not even know if it is possible." "It is possible," Orla said. "Rare, but possible. I knew a woman once who was half orc, half human. She had a hard life, caught between two worlds, but she was strong and capable and beautiful. If we have children, they will be loved, and that will make all the difference." "They will be loved, absolutely," Philip agreed. "And they will grow up seeing that different people can build something good together. That prejudice is a choice, not a destiny, and that hard work and fairness matter more than what you look like." "That is a good inheritance," Orla said, and she rested her head on his shoulder, and they fell asleep planning for a future that felt full of light. The years that followed were good ones, not without challenges but fundamentally happy. The mine continued to produce, though they eventually had to dig deeper and work harder to follow the vein as it narrowed and twisted through the rock. They hired a small crew of workers, both human and orc, and they paid fairly and treated everyone with respect, and their operation gained a reputation for being honest and safe and profitable. Philip's surveying business grew as well, and he became known throughout the region as the man to consult if you wanted to find silver or copper or coal in the frontier mountains. He turned down work from operations that treated their workers poorly, and he gave discounts to small, independent miners who were trying to make an honest living. And slowly, he built a network of people who believed in the same values he and Orla held. 3 years after their marriage, Orla gave birth to a son. The pregnancy had been difficult and the birth terrifying, and Philip had spent hours pacing outside their bedroom while the midwife worked, praying to any god who might listen that both mother and child would survive. When the midwife finally called him in and placed the squalling infant in his arms, Philip looked down at the tiny face, green-skinned and wrinkled and perfect, and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. They named him Xavier, a strong name for a boy who would grow up straddling 2 worlds. He had his mother's green skin and small tusks and his father's human features, and he was loved from his first breath in a way that left no room for doubt or shame. As Xavier grew, they made sure he knew stories of both human and orc cultures, that he understood his heritage was not a burden but a gift, and that he was part of a larger movement toward a world where such children would be accepted rather than rejected. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Carla, who had her father's lighter skin, but her mother's pointed ears and fierce spirit. She was fearless from the time she could walk, climbing onto the ore carts and demanding to help in the mine, and Philip saw his own curiosity and Orla's determination blended in her in ways that made him smile. Their family was small but complete, loud and messy and full of love, and the cottage they had built together became a home in the truest sense. The mine eventually played out, as all mines do, the vein thinning until it was no longer economical to pursue. But by then, they had saved enough to be comfortable, had diversified their income through Philip's consulting work and wise investments, and had bought additional land that they could farm or develop as they chose. They kept the cottage and the property, not for the silver beneath it, but because it was where their story had truly begun, where Philip had handed Orla a key and promised her a future, and where they had built a life that exceeded both their expectations. On a summer evening when Xavier was 6 and Carla was 4, Philip and Orla sat on the porch of their cottage and watched their children play in the yard. Xavier was showing Carla how to identify different types of rocks, a skill Philip had taught him, while Carla insisted that the prettiest rocks were obviously the best ones regardless of mineral content. Their argument was loud and affectionate, and it made both parents smile. "Do you ever think about that day in the mine?" Philip asked quietly. "About how different things could have been if you had run like everyone else?" "I think about it sometimes," Orla admitted. "About how one choice, one moment of deciding to go back instead of forward, changed everything. But I do not think about it with regret. I think about it with gratitude." "I am grateful too," Philip said. "Grateful that you were brave enough to save a stranger. Grateful that you gave me a chance to make things right. Grateful for every day we have built together since then." "I was thinking earlier about what I would say if someone asked me to name the moment my life truly began," Orla said, watching their children with soft eyes. "It was not when I was born, or when I learned to mine, or even when I saved you from the collapse. It was when you put that house key in my hand and told me it was mine. That was when I stopped just surviving and started living." Philip reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together the way they had on that first night when they had admitted their feelings. Her palm was still calloused from work, still strong and warm and familiar, and he thought about how much had changed since that desperate moment in the dark when she had braced a collapsing ceiling and dragged him to safety. She had saved his life, and in return he had given her a key. It seemed like such a small thing in retrospect, a simple piece of metal that opened a door, but it had represented so much more. A home, a partnership, a future. And from that one gift had grown this life, this family, this love that had proven stronger than prejudice or hardship or any obstacle the world had thrown at them. "We did well," Phillip said simply. "We did better than well," Orla corrected with a smile. "We did what most people said was impossible, and we did it honestly and fairly and together." "Together," Phillip agreed, and he leaned over to kiss her while their children played and the sun set gold over the mountains, and the cottage that had once been a desperate gamble stood solid and sure behind them, full of light and warmth and all the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of a life well lived. Xavier called out that he had found a piece of quartz with silver inclusions, and Carla immediately insisted that she should get to keep it because it was pretty, and Orla laughed and stood to go referee the argument. Phillip watched her walk across the yard, greeting their children with easy affection, and settling the dispute with the same calm practicality she brought to everything, and he thought about how lucky he was. Not because they had found silver in the ground, though that had certainly helped, but because he had found something far more valuable in the dark of a collapsing mine. He had found a partner who was brave and strong and true, who had saved his life and then built a life with him, who had taken a house key and turned it into a home. And that, Phillip thought as he rose to join his family, was worth more than all the silver in the frontier mountains. That was the kind of wealth that could not be measured in coin or spent or stolen, only lived and cherished and passed down to children who would carry the story forward into a future that might, if they were very lucky, be a little bit kinder than the past. The evening settled into peaceful domesticity. The family gathered close, and the valley around them was quiet except for the sound of the stream and the wind in the pines, and the laughter of children, who had never known a world where their existence was impossible. It was not the ending Phillip had imagined when he first set out for the frontier as a young man with a head full of numbers and a hunger for adventure. But it was the ending he had earned, the ending he had chosen, and the ending that made every difficult moment between that desperate rescue and this peaceful evening absolutely worth it. In the cottage behind them, hanging on a peg by the door, was the original house key that Phillip had given Orla all those years ago. They had never replaced it, even though the lock had been changed and better keys cut, because that first key represented something more than access to a building. It represented trust and partnership, and the moment when two people who had been struggling alone realized they could build something better together. And build they had, not just a home or a business or a family, but a small corner of the world where fairness mattered more than prejudice, where hard work was rewarded honestly, where an orc woman and a human man could stand as equals and be judged by their character rather than their race. It was not perfect and it would not change the whole world, but it was real and it was theirs and it was good. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.